The duality of a publisher, ladies and gentlemen. On one hand, Square Enix has been very successful with ventures like Final Fantasy XIV, which is currently the top MMO out there. When it comes to Final Fantasy in general, they've been doing really well. Dragon Quest and whatnot, a lot of their in-house stuff is really, really good stuff and generally tend to perform, but on the other side of the fence, you've got their Western Studios endeavors. Marvel's Avengers obviously was a huge train wreck, but Tomb Raider actually, when you look at the number of units sold, did pretty well, but Square Enix still deemed it a disappointment, I guess, overall in terms of the amount of revenue and profit it generated and whatnot, and that has all ultimately culminated in Square Enix selling off their Western studios, Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, and Square Enix Montreal, alongside a myriad IPs from Tomb Raider to Deus Ex to Legacy of Kain. Hopefully one day we'll see a revival of that. And a part of it had to do with the fact that Square Enix wants to divert resources into new businesses, namely endeavors such as blockchain, which is obviously very closely tied to NFTs, AI, and the cloud, none of which really paint a positive picture when it comes to the general direction the company's currently headed in. But as far as why Square Enix decided to sell all of these studios and IPs for a measly $300 million. Obviously, that's a lot of money, but in terms of the corporate realm and in terms of the acquisitions we have seen recently, $300 million for everything they sold is kind of a steal. Already attention has been raised on the fact that Western projects and IPs and studios just haven't generated as much money for Square Enix as they would have liked. Daniel Ahmad tweeted the following on May 2nd, SE Western studios have underperformed over numerous titles. Its biggest growth areas in the past year have been from Japanese studios, smartphones, or MMO. Square Enix was looking to offload Western studios for a while, Embracer is paying the full amount upon completion. When somebody pointed out that if you look at the number of units sold for some of these Western titles, that they've actually sold pretty well, Daniel Ahmad emphasized that it comes down to how much they spent on these projects versus how much money they got back. In layman's terms, they spent too much money and got a low return, which to me just seems like an inability to properly manage scope and budget, which is creating the perception that these games that were actually pretty successful were, in the eyes of Square Enix, unsuccessful. But yeah, essentially what Jeff Grubb wrote about in this GamesBeat article, whose headline reads, Square Enix didn't know how to squeeze profits out of its Western studios, has in large part to do with why the recent sale of those studios and IPs happened. And their Marvel endeavors were especially costly because they actually had to license out those IPs, which came with their own costs, and the return just wasn't enough. Marvel's Avengers, it was reported back in November of 2020 that it still hadn't turned a profit since its release, and while I don't know what those numbers look like in 2022, given the player base right now, which is sitting at roughly 300 when it comes to 24-hour peak, and the average is sitting at the low hundreds, I can't imagine this game is really making them that much money. I can only imagine it's just eating into their revenue as they maintain this game. And unfortunately, same thing goes for Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, which was actually a pretty good game, a surprisingly good game, but even then it just didn't sell very well. I think the marketing for this game was poorly handled, and while it is a very good game overall, in my opinion, I still do think that there are some gameplay refinements that they can make for the sequel. I think the sequel for this is going to be incredible. I think it's going to be a huge hit. If it happens, it seems less likely given the disappointing sales of Guardians of the Galaxy, but combine that with Marvel's Avengers disappointing sales, and you've got a situation where Square Enix has lost quite a bit of money betting on the Marvel name bolstering game sales. Now, what we learned recently is just exactly how much money they lost. Those details were kept vague, but as reported here by Tweaktown, Square Enix lost $200 million from its two Marvel games, Crystal Dynamics Avengers and Eidos Montreal's Guardians of the Galaxy games. This was originally reported by David Gibson, who is a senior analyst, and in tweets discussing Square Enix's move to invest more in blockchain and whatnot, he divulged this information, stating, strange move, plan to invest more into blockchain, etc. They don't need the money, too hard to manage overseas projects. Marvel, that's the reason why Square Enix sold its North American team for $300 million. because in a little under 2 years, they lost $200 million on 2 Marvel games. But it still looks like a low price given the optionality on probably 4 AAA titles coming through. So I guess they made some of that money back by selling these studios and IPs for $300 million, made up for that $200 million loss. But it also does feel like there's so much potential with these IPs that have gone untapped. And while I do believe that these IPs will be better off outside the control of Square Enix, because Square Enix just hasn't done as much as they could with these IPs, and I feel like there are aspects of them as handling some of these IPs. It still feels like for Square Enix as a company, selling this off for $300 million, while maybe it lines up with their current business strategies and their future endeavors with trying to invest more in blockchain, it does feel like they were thinking pretty short term and just didn't give these IPs enough of a chance to actually make them money. But it belongs to the Embracer Group now, which is this major conglomerate with a host of studios under its umbrella, and now including Eidos Montreal and Crystal Dynamics. And with them having mentioned in their official press release franchises like Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, Thief, Legacy of Kain, it seems likely that they do want to do stuff with these IPs, especially Legacy of Kain, which especially old school gamers have been clamoring to see a revival out of, but I suppose only time will tell. But $200 million is certainly nothing to scoff at, and that highlights just the folly of turning Marvel's Avengers into a live service. And then when it comes to Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, you know, marketing-wise, it could have been handled much better. This perception among game companies that if they make live services, that'll be the winner. That's how they'll remain sustainable and rake in long-term profits. It's just so woefully misguided. First of all, you have to release an actual good live service from an IP where it makes sense for it to be live service. Marvel's Avengers wasn't the type of game where that should have been made a live service. It's just, it doesn't make sense in the grand scheme of things, and it just wasn't a good live service, period. It wasn't a good looter or shooter or looter brawl or whatever you want to call it. Live services, only very few of them reach the levels of Destiny 2 and the successes of, you know, Grand Theft Auto Online or Fortnite and whatnot. And when you phone in a live service, people will just play it momentarily and then gravitate towards the other far more successful live services because they're more fun to play and people have very limited time, with these live services all taking hundreds, thousands of hours to grind out, you know, all of the best gear and, you know, to power up your character to their maximum and whatnot. But as if all that wasn't enough, one of the more successful Square Enix releases, Western Square Enix releases, Outriders, apparently, based on the latest reports, it doesn't seem like even that game made a profit, even though Square Enix has said in the past that the game actually exceeded their expectations in terms of sales performance. There's an article from Tweaktown whose headline reads, Outriders didn't make a profit in 2021, People Can Fly confirms. Scrolling down, we'll find additional details. The article makes mention of the fact that Square Enix has already lost $200 million from Marvel's Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy, and now on top of that, Outriders didn't make a profit, which means they lost money on this project as well. New financial reports from People Can Fly have confirmed that this is the case. The game, Outriders, was released back in April of 2021, and despite being on the market for 3/4 of the year, Square Enix has yet to make revenues from the game that exceed its development, marketing, and distribution budget. The article does make mention that Square Enix has previously said that Outriders exceeded their expectations. There's a whole Tweaktown article dedicated to that right here from June 18th, 2021, titled Square Enix's Outriders Bet on Game Pass Has Paid Off, and they've said right here, we've been pleasantly surprised as the digital sales ratio for the title have been very high, and the number of active users has also beaten our expectations. But I guess it's one thing to say exceeded expectation, it's another thing to say we've actually made money back. Though, I don't know, it's strange. Did Square Enix not expect to make money off of this game, or did costs just build up to a point where even if sales exceeded expectations, the expectations need to be exceeded far more for the game to make some money back? I don't know. But here's what developer People Can Fly had to say about Outriders' situation. Since the game was completed and placed on the market, which happened on April 1st, 2021, the company has been entitled to royalties payable if specific proceeds, as defined in the agreement, from its sales ensure that the publisher recovers a predetermined level of costs incurred in connection with the development, promotion, and distribution of the game. So basically, for People Can Fly to get a bonus from Square Enix, Enix, their game had to recoup a certain amount of cost for Square Enix for that to happen, but they couldn't achieve that. The level of royalties depends on the amount of specific proceeds from the game's sales. The group received no royalties from the publisher for the period to December 31st, 2021, which means that as at the reporting date, net proceeds from the sale of Outriders were insufficient to recover the costs and expenses incurred by the publisher to develop, distribute, and promote the title. Now, I don't think Square Enix has commented about this, but this comes directly from the development studio behind Outriders, and they're basically saying, since we haven't gotten royalties, the indication is clearly that Square Enix didn't make money back from Outriders, or at least not enough to meet the threshold that would have allowed them to get royalties and bonuses from Square Enix. And then they proceeded with, this was confirmed by the royalty statement for the fourth quarter of 2021 received by the group from the publisher. And then their statement continues with, there can be no assurance that the net proceeds from the sale of Outriders in future periods will be sufficient for the publisher to recover the costs incurred and to pay royalties to the group. Basically, they're saying, looking long-term and continued sales of Outriders, it's starting to look like this game, even in the long term, will not make Square Enix enough money to recoup costs and, in turn, allow for People Can Fly to receive royalties. Last but not least, it was also mentioned that Square Enix has full IP and publishing rights to the Outriders brand. That means People Can Fly may not have made any money from Outriders' commercial release as of 2021. Here we have one last quote that reads, under the development and publishing agreement, the company transferred to the publisher its existing and future intellectual property rights, copyrighted property rights in Outriders. So the IP straight up just belongs to Square Enix. And this happened to be one of the few Western IPs that Square Enix did not sell off, as they said in their official statement detailing the sale of Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, and Square Enix Montreal. The company's overseas studios will continue to publish franchises such as Just Cause, Outriders, and Life is Strange. So at the very least, even if Square Enix didn't make a profit or enough of a profit off of Outriders, it does seem like it performed well enough that Square Enix sees some long-term potential and long-term hope for the IP, for a sequel to potentially do better and for them to make money down the line when the Outriders IP can be further bolstered. But I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens on that front. But none of this bodes well for optics surrounding Square Enix, which recently sold off a bunch of beloved IPs, which I think generally people agree is better off outside of Square Enix's control, but still it just, I guess, like devalues the company in the eyes of gamers and enthusiasts. On top of that, they lost a bunch of money from their Marvel endeavors, especially with the shoehorning of a live service component in Marvel's Avengers, and they picked Crystal Dynamics of all studios to work on this Marvel's Avengers live service, a studio that's more experienced with those story-driven action-adventure games that would have better suited Marvel's Avengers instead of a live service, genre that Crystal Dynamics isn't as experienced in. And then on top of that, them aggressively pushing for blockchain, them emphasizing in their New Year letter that the metaverse is going to be super important for the future, NFTs are going to be super important, and them dismissing the idea of play to have fun as if that were an optional aspect of video games. It just feels like overall the Square Enix ship is being steered in the wrong direction, and it just paints a disconcerting picture, but I suppose only time will tell. I'm worried. I'm worried about their recent missteps. I'm worried about their inclination towards greedy business tactics, and I'm just not overly enthusiastic about the future of this company if it continues to insist on prioritizing metaverse and NFTs over games and over doing right by the beloved IPs under their umbrella. But this is one man's concern and one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the latest developments surrounding Square Enix, their $200 million loss when it comes to their Marvel projects, Outriders not making a profit, all while they're selling off valuable studios and IPs in favor of investing in things that gamers don't want, metaverse, NFTs, and whatnot. Share your thoughts about all of this in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.